The sun had barely risen over the small suburban neighborhood of Elmswood, casting a soft, golden light through the thin curtains of my bedroom window. I thought mornings were supposed to bring comfort, warmth, and a sense of safety. But for me, mornings had become a reminder that the people who were supposed to protect me were the very ones who made life unbearable. I had always known that my stepmother, Regina, didn't like me. The moment she first stepped into our lives, she made it clear that I was an obstacle in her path. But what I hadn't realized until recently was just how far she would go to make me feel small, powerless, and invisible. It all started that morning when I was called into the living room. My father, Michael, sat in his chair, a glass of orange juice in hand, while Regina stood behind him, her expression sharp and cold. "You know why you're here," she said, her voice slicing through the quiet room like a knife. I nodded, my stomach twisting into knots. I didn't want to be here. I didn't want to face her wrath. But I had no choice. My father didn't stop her. He just sat there watching, his eyes strangely blank. I followed her into the room that had once been my sanctuary. It had been transformed into a place of fear. Regina's voice didn't raise, but every word carried weight, a silent force that pressed down on me. "You need to understand your place," she whispered, leaning close. Her words were venomous, yet precise, cutting through my confidence bit by bit. "If you step out of line, there will be consequences." I felt a shiver run down my spine. I had been preparing myself mentally for confrontation, but nothing had prepared me for the realization that my father wasn't going to intervene. In fact, his presence, or lack of protection, made everything worse. I clenched my fists, trying to fight back tears. I couldn't let her see me break. Not today. Not ever. I had to find a way to survive. Regina circled me like a predator, her gaze sharp and predatory. "You think you're clever, don't you? Always sneaking around, always thinking you're better than this. But you're not. You're mine to control, and don't forget who's on your side." She glanced at my father, a twisted smile forming. "Or who should be." My heart stopped for a second. The betrayal hit me like a tidal wave. I realized then, with sickening clarity, that the one person I had trusted to keep me safe had abandoned me entirely. The man I had called Dad, who had held me when I fell or cried when I was hurt, was now complicit in making me feel worthless. I wanted to scream, but my voice caught in my throat. I tried to make my body move to escape, but the room seemed to close in on me. The walls, the furniture, the very air felt like it was pressing down, pushing me to submit, to accept the role that Regina had carved out for me. Then, just when I thought I could no longer bear it, a tiny spark of defiance ignited inside me. I thought about all the times I had dreamed of freedom, of being seen as more than just a target for their cruelty. I realized that if I didn't do something, if I didn't fight in whatever way I could, I would be trapped forever. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my shaking hands. My mind raced with possibilities, desperate for a way out. But at that moment, my father's empty gaze reminded me that I couldn't rely on anyone else. I had to rely on myself. And so I made a decision. A quiet, determined promise to myself. I would survive. I would find a way out. And I would not let them win. Just as the thought solidified in my mind, Regina stepped closer, her shadow falling over me like a dark cloud. The air in the room seemed to thicken, and I felt panic rise once more. My pulse thundered in my ears. I knew that the next few moments would define everything that came after. She reached for me, but I sidestepped, a small act of rebellion, and that single movement sparked a reaction I didn't expect. My father shifted in his chair, his expression unreadable. For a fleeting moment, I wondered if he might intervene. But then, almost casually, he leaned back, and the weight of his indifference slammed into me like a door shutting on my chest. I realized then that there was no rescue coming, no sudden hero, no one to stop what was happening. It was just me, trapped in a house where the people I loved, or thought I loved, had become my oppressors. I had two choices: surrender and let the despair swallow me, or find a way to fight back, even if it was just a small step. My choice was clear. With a deep breath, I squared my shoulders. I would not let fear dictate my life. I would find a way to reclaim it, no matter how long it took or how difficult the path. But as I looked around the room, my stepmother's piercing eyes locked on mine, and my father's unsettling calm filled the air. I realized that making this decision was only the first step. The next steps would test me in ways I couldn't even imagine. And just when I thought I had prepared myself for everything, Regina whispered something that made my blood run cold. "You think you can defy me, but trust me. Everything you fear is only beginning." Froze. The weight of her words sank deep into my bones. A storm was coming, and I was standing in the eye of it, knowing that I had to act before it consumed me entirely. That was the moment I knew with absolute certainty that I had to decide, to fight, to escape, or to break. And in the silence that followed, with the morning light streaming through the window, I made my choice. The days that followed were worse than I could have imagined. Mornings in our house were no longer just a time for breakfast and school. They had become a test of endurance, a trial where I had to measure every word, every movement, every glance. My stepmother, Regina, had perfected the art of intimidation. It wasn't always loud. Often it was the quiet, cutting remarks, the subtle shifts in her expression, the way she could make me feel like I had done something unforgivable when I had done nothing at all. I learned quickly to read her moods. The wrong step could result in days of isolation or verbal punishment. My father, Michael, was always nearby, never intervening. His presence had changed. Instead of the man who had once held me and offered comfort, he now seemed distant and detached, occasionally smiling in ways that made me feel even smaller, as if my discomfort entertained him. School had become a place of temporary relief. At least there, the world didn't seem as cruel. But even there I carried the weight of home. Every laugh I shared with friends felt fragile, a reminder that at home I was trapped. Every teacher's concerned glance made me tense because I feared that any cry for help might backfire. I had to find a way to survive. I began documenting everything in secret, writing in a small notebook I hid under my mattress. Every insult, every cruel act, every moment my father failed to protect me went into those pages. Writing became my lifeline, a way to remind myself that I was still real, that my existence mattered, and that I had not yet been broken entirely. One evening, after what felt like an eternity of walking on eggshells, Regina summoned me to the bedroom again. My stomach tightened. My notebook had been tucked away safely, but I knew that if she found it, it could escalate everything. "Sit down," she commanded, gesturing to the chair at the foot of the bed. Her tone was casual, almost ordinary, but it carried a weight I couldn't ignore. I obeyed, my hands resting on my lap. My father sat in the corner, reading a newspaper, pretending to be absorbed. The air was heavy with tension. I could feel Regina studying me, weighing me, deciding what punishment or humiliation she would inflict this time. "You think you're clever," she said finally, breaking the silence. "Sneaking around, hiding things, thinking you can play some game. But I know everything." Her words were enough to make me shiver. I didn't respond, didn't dare. Silence, I realized, was my only armor. Hours passed like this. Little tasks were assigned, inspections of my room, trivial questions that seemed innocent but were really designed to make me feel trapped. My father didn't intervene. Occasionally he looked up from his paper, and I caught a flicker of something in his eyes. A smirk, a look I couldn't quite place, but no one said a word. By the time evening came, I was exhausted. My body ached from the tension, my mind racing with ways to escape the constant scrutiny. I knew I couldn't wait for someone else to save me. I had to save myself. That night, after everyone else had gone to bed, I sat on the floor of my room, the small notebook in my hands. I wrote feverishly, detailing every insult, every moment I had felt unsafe, every feeling of betrayal. "I have to do something," I whispered to myself. "I can't stay here forever." I began making a plan. It was risky, dangerous even, but staying passive had led me only deeper into fear. If I wanted freedom, I had to act. I thought about calling someone I could trust, but who could I trust when my father, the man who was supposed to protect me, had failed? I considered sneaking out at night, leaving our house behind, finding a place where I could be safe. I thought about hiding in a friend's house, going to the police, or even finding refuge with a distant relative I hadn't spoken to in years. Every option seemed terrifying, but each one was better than staying under Regina's control. Sleep came fitfully. My dreams were restless, filled with shadows and whispers, the echo of Regina's sharp voice, the emptiness in my father's eyes. I woke up with a start several times, every creak of the house making my heart pound. I realized that fear had become a constant companion, but it was also a motivator. The next morning, everything continued as before. School offered temporary relief, but home remained a place of dread. During breakfast, Regina made a subtle remark about how careless I was the night before, and my father didn't correct her. My chest tightened. I realized that nothing I did would change their behavior. They were entrenched in their cruelty. By mid-morning I had decided. I would act. I couldn't allow the fear, the abuse, and the betrayal to define the rest of my life. I began preparing in secret, gathering small items I could use if I tried to leave. A backpack, a few clothes, my hidden notebook, and some money I had managed to save from small errands. Even as I planned, I felt the weight of every possible consequence. If I were caught, the punishment could be unbearable. Yet, the thought of remaining passive was far worse. The choice became painfully clear. I had to escape or surrender my life to fear. That evening, Regina again summoned me. I could sense her anger bubbling beneath the surface. She had noticed subtle changes in my behavior, the way I avoided her gaze, the small defiance in my posture. "You think you can outsmart me," she hissed. "But trust me, I know every move you make." I stared at her, trying to hide the storm of emotions swirling inside me. Fear, yes, but also determination. I could no longer afford to be small, to be invisible. I had to survive, even if it meant taking risks I wasn't sure I could manage. As she turned and left the room, I sat quietly, my mind racing. I realized that the time for silent endurance had passed. I had made a choice. I had decided to act. And though the path ahead was uncertain, dangerous, and full of unknowns, it was mine to take. Because if I didn't, no one else would. The night was darker than usual, the moon hidden behind thick clouds, as if the sky itself knew what I was about to attempt. I had spent the past few days planning every detail, memorizing my parents' movements, timing when the house was quietest, and imagining every possible outcome. My body was tense with anticipation, but beneath the fear, there was a fierce determination. I waited until I heard the familiar soft snore of my father drifting from the living room. Regina had gone to her bedroom earlier, likely feeling triumphant after another day of making me feel powerless. I took a deep breath, letting the small glow of the flashlight I had hidden under my bed guide my movements. Every step I took was careful, measured, silent. My backpack was ready, packed with the essentials. A change of clothes, my notebook, some money I had secretly saved, and a small bottle of water. Each item felt heavy with the weight of possibility. Freedom or disaster, I didn't know which awaited me. I reached the door, my hand trembling as I touched the doorknob. The hallway stretched before me, quiet, eerily still. My heart thumped in my chest like a drum, but I reminded myself, this was my chance. If I didn't act now, I might never get another opportunity. Step by step, I moved toward the front door, trying to make as little noise as possible. I could hear the faint creak of the stairs above me, where Regina had once stood, watching, waiting for me to falter. I pictured her face in my mind, her eyes sharp and unrelenting, but I pushed the fear down, focusing instead on what lay beyond this house. Freedom, safety, a chance to reclaim my life. As I reached the front door, I froze. The faintest creak echoed behind me. My pulse quickened. Was it my imagination or had someone moved? I held my breath, straining to listen. Then, a soft shuffle from the living room made my heart leap into my throat. I couldn't turn back. Not now. Not after everything I had endured. I opened the door slowly, the cold night air rushing in and filling my lungs with a sharp, invigorating relief. The world outside seemed impossibly quiet, but to me it was alive with hope. I stepped onto the porch, my feet shaking but moving forward. Suddenly, a voice called out from the shadows. "Where do you think you're going?" Froze. My father's voice. He had woken, somehow aware of my attempt. Panic surged through me, but I couldn't let it paralyze me. I sprinted toward the street, my backpack bouncing against my shoulders, the fear propelling me forward faster than I ever thought possible. Regina appeared at the doorway, her face twisted with rage. "You won't get away," she screamed. But I didn't look back. My legs burned, my chest heaved, but every step was a step toward freedom. I ran until the house was a distant shadow behind me, until the streetlights flickered above me and the first hints of dawn began to touch the horizon. My body was exhausted, but my mind was racing with the reality of what I had done. I had escaped, even if only for a little while. I found refuge in a nearby park, hiding among the trees and benches. I sat on a cold metal bench, my backpack clutched to my chest, trying to steady my trembling hands. My heart still raced, but there was a small spark of triumph in me. I had acted. I had chosen myself over fear, over oppression. But even as relief washed over me, I knew the danger wasn't over. My father and stepmother would notice I was gone, and they would search for me. The thought made me shiver, but I also felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: power. I had taken the first step toward reclaiming my life, and no one could take that away from me. I thought about my notebook, all the evidence I had quietly recorded, all the feelings I had documented. It wasn't just paper and ink, it was proof of everything, a testament to my struggle, a map of my journey toward freedom. I hugged it tightly, letting myself believe that maybe, just maybe, I could finally make them see the consequences of their cruelty. Hours passed in the park. I watched as people went about their lives, unaware of my secret struggle. It was a strange comfort to see normalcy outside the walls that had confined me. I wasn't completely safe, but I was no longer powerless. By the time the morning sun began to rise, painting the sky with soft pinks and oranges, I knew I had to make a decision. I couldn't stay in the park forever. I needed a plan, a place to go, someone to trust. But more importantly, I had to decide what I was willing to risk to secure my freedom. As I sat there, thinking through my options, a figure appeared on the path ahead. A stranger, a passerby, someone who might offer help, or someone who might notice the panic in my eyes. I froze, unsure if I should approach or hide. The fear and uncertainty of the world outside were almost as intense as what I had left behind. And in that moment, I realized the truth I had been clinging to. Escaping was only the first step. The real challenge was surviving out there, navigating a world that was vast, unpredictable, and completely outside my control. But I had made my choice. I had decided. And no matter what came next, I knew that I would not return to the life that had nearly crushed me. The first hours outside felt like stepping into a new world. The streets of Elmswood, which had once seemed familiar and safe, now felt alien and unpredictable. Every shadow, every passing car, every distant footstep made me jump. But as much as fear clung to me, there was also a strange exhilaration, a realization that I had finally taken control of my own life, even if only in this small way. I wandered through the quiet streets, clutching my backpack tightly, my notebook pressed against my chest. Every corner, every alley reminded me of how carefully I had plotted my escape. Yet freedom came with its own dangers. I was alone, with no one to protect me, no one to guide me. The world beyond the house was enormous and unforgiving. Eventually, I found myself in a small park, its benches empty at this early hour. I collapsed onto one of them, exhausted. My legs shook, my arms ached from carrying the backpack, and my heart still raced from the adrenaline. I dared to breathe slowly, trying to calm the storm inside me. But calm was fleeting. Thoughts of Regina and my father haunted me. I knew they would notice I was gone soon. The fear of being found, of being dragged back into that nightmare, gnawed at the edges of my resolve. My mind raced with possibilities. Could I reach a friend or neighbor? Was there a safe place I could hide until nightfall? Could I even call someone for help without revealing my location? As I sat there trying to plan my next move, I noticed a small convenience store across the street. It was open, and the lights inside felt like a beacon of hope. I hesitated, wondering if entering would draw unwanted attention, but I knew I needed supplies. Food, water, anything to help me survive. I crossed the street carefully, my eyes scanning for anyone who might recognize me. Inside, the store was quiet, the clerk behind the counter half asleep. I approached cautiously, my voice barely above a whisper. "Can I buy some food and water?" The clerk nodded, eyes still drooping. I paid quickly, grateful that no one seemed to notice my trembling hands or the panic hidden beneath my calm facade. With my small bag of supplies, I stepped back into the night, feeling slightly more prepared, yet still vulnerable. Hours passed as I navigated the streets, searching for a place to rest. I avoided well-lit areas, moving through shadows and empty sidewalks, careful not to attract attention. Every sound, the bark of a dog, a car engine starting, distant voices, made me flinch. My fear was constant, but beneath it, a growing sense of determination kept me moving forward. By midday, I found refuge in an abandoned shed at the edge of a small park. It wasn't comfortable, but it was hidden, and for now that was enough. I placed my backpack carefully in a corner and sat down, trying to catch my breath. I allowed myself a moment to reflect on what I had done. I had taken the first step toward freedom, but I knew the path ahead would not be easy. I pulled out my notebook and began writing again, documenting every detail of my escape, every thought, every fear. Writing had always been a way to process my emotions, and now it served as a lifeline, a reminder that I still had control over at least one part of my life. As I wrote, I thought about the life I had left behind. My stepmother's cold, calculating gaze, my father's disturbing indifference, the oppressive atmosphere that had once felt like home. It all seemed like a distant nightmare now. But I knew that nightmare wasn't over. They would search for me. They would try to bring me back. Determined not to be caught off guard, I began planning my next steps. I would need allies, people I could trust. I would need a place to stay, a way to keep myself safe. The thought was overwhelming, but I reminded myself that I had survived this far. I could survive further. Night fell again, and with it came new dangers. The streets were quieter, but the shadows seemed deeper, the air colder. I stayed hidden, moving only when necessary, careful not to make a sound. I thought about returning home, even briefly, to gather more supplies, but fear held me back. I couldn't risk being caught. Hours later, I found a small diner still open, its neon sign flickering in the darkness. Inside, the warmth and smell of food were comforting, a stark contrast to the cold, empty streets. I approached the counter, hesitating before speaking. "Can I get something to eat?" I asked softly. The waitress smiled gently, a kindness I hadn't felt in months. "Of course, honey. Sit wherever you like." I chose a corner booth, careful to remain unnoticed. As I ate, I felt a small spark of hope. Perhaps there were people in the world who could be trusted, who would help me if I asked. But I knew I couldn't reveal too much, not yet. My father and stepmother's reach might extend further than I realized. As I left the diner, the cold night air hit me again, reminding me that I was still alone. But I also felt a growing strength within me, a determination to keep moving forward no matter what obstacles lay ahead. I had decided to fight, to survive, and nothing would stop me from taking back my life. But as I walked back toward the shadows of the park, I heard a familiar sound, the distant screech of tires on pavement, a car moving too quickly through the quiet streets. My heart leapt. Could it be them? Had they discovered I was gone? I ducked behind a tree, holding my breath as the car passed by, the engine fading into the distance. My pulse was racing, but I knew one thing for certain. I had made a decision, and I would not go back. I had chosen to fight, and that choice would guide every step I took from now on. The night stretched on, long and unyielding. But I was alive. I was free for now. And I had made a promise to myself that no one could break. I would survive, I would escape, and I would reclaim my life. She's out in the world, but danger is closing in. Will she find safety or be caught? Please subscribe to this channel to keep us going. Her secret plan is about to take shape, and you won't believe what she does next." The next few days blurred together, a mix of fear, vigilance, and careful observation. I had found a small abandoned shed on the edge of town to hide in during the day, and I would move under the cover of night, searching for safer places, food, and anyone who might offer help. But even as I navigated this dangerous new world, I realized that hiding wasn't enough. I needed a plan, a real strategy to secure my safety permanently. I began by retracing the movements of my father and stepmother. I needed to understand their habits, their routines, and the moments when they were most likely to be distracted. Every small detail became crucial: when they left the house, who they spoke to, and even the tone of their voices when they were frustrated or tired. I documented everything in my notebook, turning my fear into information, and information into power. At night, I explored further, looking for people I could trust. I didn't approach anyone immediately. Instead, I observed. There was a neighbor, an older woman who walked her dog every evening, always greeting the few passers-by with a smile. There was a teacher I had admired from school, always kind and attentive to students. They seemed like possible allies, though I knew I had to be careful. Any misstep could reveal my presence to my stepmother and father. One night, while resting in the park, I made a critical decision. I needed to gather proof of everything that had happened to me. My notebook documented the abuse in words, but I needed something more tangible, evidence that could protect me if my stepmother or father tried to manipulate the story. I started thinking creatively, using small tools I had hidden in my backpack to take notes discreetly and to document the house when I could do so safely. The plan was risky, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized I had no choice. I could not allow them to continue controlling me, and I could not rely on them to ever admit their wrongdoing. The only way to protect myself was to take matters into my own hands. I spent the next few nights preparing. I learned the best times to move around without being seen, the quietest routes through the streets and alleys, and the locations where I could find temporary refuge if necessary. Each small observation became part of a mental map that I carried with me constantly. Then came the first test of my plan. One evening, I ventured closer to home than I ever had before, careful to remain hidden in the shadows. I needed to gather a small item from the house. A notebook, a piece of clothing, something that would help me prove who I was and what I had endured. My heart pounded, but I reminded myself. I had decided to act, and this was part of that decision. I moved cautiously, every step deliberate. The street was quiet, but my senses were alert to the faintest sound. I reached the back door, carefully prying it open, and slipped inside. The familiar smell of the house hit me, but this time it didn't feel suffocating. It felt like an arena, a place where I had once been trapped, now transformed into a challenge I was determined to overcome. Inside, I moved swiftly but quietly, avoiding the areas where I knew my father or stepmother might be. I retrieved the notebook from my hiding place under the bed and added a few additional pages, documenting my escape and observations. I also found a small hidden camera in the corner of the room, one they had used to monitor the house, and managed to take a discreet photo of it as proof of the surveillance I had endured. With the items secured, I slipped out the way I had entered, my pulse racing but my confidence growing. This small victory reinforced my belief that I could act strategically, that I could turn fear into a tool rather than a trap. Back in my temporary refuge, I examined the items I had taken. The notebook, the small camera, and the observations I had made were now pieces of a puzzle that could protect me, could ensure that no one could manipulate the truth about what had happened. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of empowerment, a reminder that while I had been a victim, I was no longer powerless. But even as I celebrated this small victory, I knew the danger was far from over. My father and stepmother would notice my absence eventually. They would search, they would question, and they would try to reclaim control over me. I could not allow that to happen. My plan had to evolve beyond temporary hiding. It had to become a strategy for permanent safety. I began thinking about the next steps. I needed allies, people who could intervene if necessary, who could help me escape completely and ensure my protection. I considered calling a distant relative, but I feared my father might intercept any communication. I thought about approaching a trusted teacher or the older neighbor I had noticed, someone who could offer guidance and possibly shelter. Night after night, I refined my plan, moving cautiously but deliberately. Each step, each decision carried weight. I could no longer afford mistakes. Every observation, every small action brought me closer to freedom. And through it all, a quiet resolve grew inside me. I had decided that no matter what happened, I would not allow fear, abuse, or betrayal to define the rest of my life. I had chosen to fight, and that choice had changed everything. But even as I planned, I knew that the real test was still ahead. The confrontation, the ultimate act of courage, would demand everything I had learned, everything I had prepared, and every ounce of strength I possessed. I closed my eyes that night, whispering to myself, "I've decided. I will not let them control me. I will survive no matter what." The night air was crisp and biting as I moved through the quiet streets of Elmswood, my backpack snug against my shoulders. My heart pounded in a rhythm that matched my hurried footsteps, but beneath the adrenaline, there was an unshakable determination. I had spent days preparing, watching, planning every possible scenario, and now it was time to act on everything I had learned. The house behind me loomed silently in the darkness, a place of fear and betrayal, but also the source of my motivation. Each step I took away from it reinforced the decision I had made. I would not let fear control my life any longer. I had decided to reclaim it. I had mapped the safest route to reach a distant relative's home, a place I hoped would offer safety and temporary refuge. Every alley, every quiet side street, every shadowed corner was a part of my plan. Yet, as careful as I was, I knew that mistakes could be disastrous. One wrong move, one sound too loud, and I could be caught, dragged back into the nightmare I was trying to escape. The streets were empty, save for the occasional distant car. I hugged the shadows, slipping between light and dark, my senses heightened. Every step was deliberate, calculated, but the tension was suffocating. My mind replayed the cruel words of my stepmother, the empty gaze of my father, memories that fueled my urgency. Suddenly, a faint noise echoed from behind me. Car engine, too close, too deliberate. My stomach tightened. Could it be them? Had they discovered I was gone already? I ducked behind a row of bushes, holding my breath as the headlights swept past, the sound of tires fading into the distance. Relief washed over me, but only briefly. The danger was real, and the stakes were higher than ever. I continued my journey, moving carefully, never staying in one place for long. Hours passed, each moment stretching endlessly, but I refused to stop. My determination had grown into a quiet, burning resolve. I would reach safety no matter what. As dawn began to break, painting the sky with streaks of pink and orange, I approached the neighborhood where my relative lived. My legs ached, my backpack felt impossibly heavy, but I ignored the pain. I had made it this far. Turning back was not an option. Finally, I reached the house, a modest home nestled among trees and quiet streets. I hesitated, heart pounding. What if they didn't believe me? What if I was rejected? Taking a deep breath, I knocked on the door, my hand trembling. The door opened to reveal a kind-faced woman, her eyes widening at the sight of me. Dirty, tired, but alive. You're safe now," she said softly, ushering me inside. Relief and gratitude surged through me, but I knew this was only temporary. I was safe for now, but the threat of my father and stepmother's pursuit loomed. Over the next few hours, I explained everything in careful, measured words. I didn't go into unnecessary detail, but I made sure she understood the danger I had faced, and the reality of what I had escaped. She listened, her eyes full of concern and disbelief, but also determination to help me with her guidance. I began to make a plan for the next steps, notifying authorities, securing proof of the abuse, and finding a more permanent safe place. I realized that surviving this night was only the beginning. The real battle was ensuring that my stepmother and father could never control me again. Even as I rested that night, safe for the first time in what felt like forever, a part of me remained vigilant. I knew that freedom was fragile, that danger could strike again at any moment. But I also knew something more important. I had decided to fight. I had acted. And no matter the obstacles, I would continue to act to protect myself and reclaim my life. The road ahead was uncertain, full of risk and fear, but I no longer felt powerless. I had made my choice. I had decided. And that decision would carry me through every challenge yet to come. She's made it out, but the danger isn't over. Click on subscribe button. Next chapter of her life will reveal the first confrontation and whether her father and stepmother will try to take control again. Don't miss it. You won't believe what happens next. The days after my escape were a blur of cautious movements and careful observation. Though I was safe for the moment, the memory of my stepmother's sharp gaze and my father's empty eyes haunted me. I knew they wouldn't give up easily. The thought of them actively searching for me made each night feel like a tightrope walk over an endless chasm. I had found a temporary refuge with my relative, whose small home offered safety and a chance to catch my breath. But safety didn't mean freedom. Every knock on the door, every sound from outside made me flinch. I was hyper-aware, constantly scanning windows and streets. My father and stepmother's presence lingered in my mind, an invisible shadow that made me tense and alert. I spent the first few nights quietly observing my surroundings, learning the patterns of the neighborhood and planning my next steps. Every detail mattered. Which doors were left unlocked, which neighbors were friendly, which streets were empty at night. I needed a strategy that would keep me one step ahead, because I knew sooner or later, my stepmother would come looking for me herself. One evening, as I peered out the window, I noticed a familiar car slowly passing by the street. My heart clenched. It was them, my father driving, my stepmother beside him. I could see her eyes scanning the houses, her expression sharp and predatory. I ducked out of sight, my pulse racing. This was the first real sign that they were actively searching. Panic threatened to take over, but I forced myself to stay calm. I had decided to act, not react. I retreated to a small hidden corner of the house, checking the items I had secured. My notebook, the small photos, and my carefully documented evidence. These items were my lifeline, my proof that I had survived and had the right to defend myself. That night, I realized I needed more than a temporary hideout. I needed to confront the situation strategically, to make it clear that I could not be controlled or intimidated. I began drafting a plan. Careful steps, allies I could trust, and clear proof of everything I had endured. My goal wasn't revenge. It was survival and reclaiming my life. A few days later, I ventured out cautiously to gather supplies, making sure to avoid any familiar streets that could lead them to me. As I moved, I saw them again. Regina stepping out of a neighbor's driveway, scanning the street, calling my name. My pulse shot up. My decision had been made months ago to fight back. But this was the first real test of my courage. I ducked behind a parked car, holding my breath as they moved down the street, unaware that I was nearby. My body shook, not with fear, but with determination. I had survived the house, the abuse, and my father's betrayal. I would survive this too. That night, I contacted the trusted neighbor I had observed weeks ago. I explained the situation carefully, providing only the details needed to ensure my safety. Her eyes widened in shock and concern, but she promised to help. I felt a wave of relief. I wasn't entirely alone in this world. There were people who could offer protection, guidance, and support. Still, the confrontation had left its mark. I realized that while I had acted courageously, the danger was real and ongoing. My stepmother and father were relentless, and I had to be relentless too. I returned to my temporary refuge, planning the next steps of my strategy. Every day was a balancing act. Survival, observation, and careful planning. As I settled into the night, I whispered to myself once more. I have decided. I will not let them control me. I will survive no matter what. The first confrontation had tested me, but it also confirmed something important. My courage, my determination, and my ability to act could not be broken. The battle was far from over. I knew the next steps would be even more dangerous, but I had made my choice. I had decided to reclaim my life. And nothing, not fear, not betrayal, not abuse, would stop me from seeing it through. The first confrontation is over, but the fight is just beginning. The next chapter will reveal the steps she takes to secure her permanent safety, and it's more intense than ever. Click next, you won't want to miss it. Please hit the subscribe button to help this channel grow. The morning sunlight streamed through the small curtains of my temporary refuge, painting the room with a soft glow that contrasted sharply with the darkness of the past weeks. I had survived the house, the abuse, the betrayal, but I knew survival alone wasn't enough. I needed a permanent solution, a way to ensure that my stepmother and father could never manipulate or harm me again. With the trusted neighbor's guidance, I began organizing the steps that would lead to lasting safety. First, I secured all the evidence I had collected: the notebook detailing every abusive moment, the small photos documenting surveillance, and the careful notes about my father and stepmother's routines. I made copies of everything, hiding them in different locations to protect them from discovery. Next, I contacted a local social services office under the cover of a public library visit. I explained my situation calmly, presenting the evidence I had gathered. The social worker listened intently, eyes wide with concern, promising immediate action. Relief surged through me. For the first time, I felt a measure of protection outside of my own careful planning. Even so, the thought of my stepmother and father discovering my location kept me vigilant. I moved quietly, changed my routes, and maintained a careful schedule. Every decision, every step, was calculated to maximize safety and minimize exposure. Fear was still present, but it was now tempered by control, a control I had fought hard to reclaim. One evening, I heard a knock on the door that made my pulse quicken. My heart froze. Could it be them? I glanced out the window cautiously and saw a uniformed officer standing on the porch. My knees nearly gave way, but I reminded myself. I had taken steps to protect myself. The officer entered, explaining that social services had followed up, confirming my report and ensuring I was in a safe location. They would provide a more secure residence and support, helping me move past the danger. I allowed myself a small sigh of relief. This was a turning point. I had acted, and now action had responded in kind. The next few days were filled with preparations for my relocation. I packed carefully, taking only what I needed, and left some items behind to maintain secrecy. I knew that my stepmother and father might still search, but I had taken every precaution to ensure I couldn't be traced easily. At night, I thought back on the path that had brought me here. The abuse, the fear, the betrayal, and the courage it had taken to act. I realized that the decision I had made months ago to fight for myself had transformed me. I was no longer a passive victim. I was a survivor, capable of strategy, courage, and foresight. Finally, the day came when I would move to the secure residence provided by social services. As I left my temporary refuge, I looked back one last time, feeling a mixture of relief, sorrow, and triumph. The house that had held me captive was behind me now, a symbol of a chapter one had survived but would never forget. The new residence was quiet, safe, and welcoming. I met with staff who explained my rights, my options, and the support available to me. For the first time, I felt a sense of permanence, a possibility of a life free from fear, abuse, and betrayal. Even as I settled in, I remained vigilant. My father and stepmother were still out there, but now I had allies, evidence, and a plan to protect myself. I realized that safety wasn't a single moment. It was an ongoing effort, a daily commitment to survival and empowerment. That night, as I lay in bed, I whispered the words that had guided me from the beginning. I have decided. I will survive. I will reclaim my life. Nothing will stop me. The sense of peace was tentative but real, a promise that the darkest days were behind me. I knew the path ahead would still have challenges, but I had taken control. I had acted decisively, courageously, and strategically. And now, for the first time in a long while, I could imagine a future not defined by fear, but by choice, hope, and freedom. The first morning in my new residence felt surreal. The sunlight streamed through large windows, filling the room with a warmth I hadn't felt in years. For the first time, I allowed myself to breathe deeply, to feel the absence of immediate fear. It was a quiet victory, one that had been earned through courage, careful planning, and relentless determination. Even so, I knew the work wasn't finished. My father and stepmother might still search, and their control over my past could continue to haunt me if I didn't take action. I spent the morning reviewing everything I had documented. The notebook, the photos, the observations. Each page was a testament to my struggle, my resilience, and the steps I had taken to survive. With guidance from the staff, I contacted authorities to file a comprehensive report. I shared my evidence and recounted the abuse in detail, ensuring that my father and stepmother could be held accountable if necessary. The process was daunting, but I felt empowered. Speaking my truth, having it recorded and recognized, was a form of liberation I hadn't experienced before. In the days that followed, I began rebuilding my life. Small steps, like attending school or reconnecting with a few trusted friends, felt monumental. I discovered the strength that comes from acting decisively in the face of fear. The house that had once confined me, the people who had betrayed me, were now distant shadows, powerless to dictate my future. Yet, the emotional weight of the past lingered. At night, memories of my stepmother's cold eyes and my father's indifference threatened to overwhelm me. But I had learned to turn fear into strategy, and despair into action. I journaled, exercised, and connected with counselors who helped me process the trauma. Each day, the weight lifted slightly, replaced by confidence, self-awareness, and hope. One evening, as I walked in the small garden outside the residence, I realized how far I had come. I was no longer hiding. I was no longer powerless. I had acted, survived, and taken control of my life. The thought filled me with an unexpected joy. A joy born not from forgetting the past, but from reclaiming my right to live freely despite it. I also knew the journey of healing was ongoing. There would be moments of fear, doubt, and sadness. But I had decided long ago that I would not allow others to dictate my life. That decision, that commitment to myself, had carried me through the darkest nights and into this light. A few weeks later, I received confirmation that my father and stepmother's actions were being formally investigated. I had secured protection, a safe environment, and evidence that could ensure my voice was heard. The fear that once dominated my days was replaced by empowerment, a profound awareness of my own strength. Sitting by the window one evening, I reflected on the journey. The abuse, the betrayal, the nights spent in hiding, and the careful steps I had taken to survive. I realized that every decision, every calculated risk, had been a choice to reclaim my life. I whispered to myself once more. I decided, acted, I survived, and now I live. The words were more than a mantra, they were a declaration of freedom. For the first time I could imagine a future filled with possibilities. I could pursue my dreams, form relationships based on trust, and live without fear. My stepmother and father could no longer dictate my reality. I had made my choice, and that choice had changed everything. The sun set, casting a golden glow over the garden. I felt a sense of closure, not because the past was erased, but because I had acted decisively to ensure it no longer controlled me. I had survived, and in surviving, I had reclaimed my life. The path ahead would still have challenges, but I faced it with courage, strategy, and the unshakable knowledge that I had decided my own fate. And in that knowledge I found peace, strength, and hope. Her journey from fear to freedom is complete, but her courage is a reminder. No matter the darkness, deciding to fight can change everything. Share this story, inspire others, and remember, your choice can shape your life. If this story inspired you, gave you hope, or kept you on the edge of your seat, don't miss out on more amazing emotional stories like this. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you'll be the first to see every new chapter of our channel. Your support means the world, and together, we'll continue exploring stories of courage, survival, and triumph. Sparkling Heart. Subscribe now and join our journey. You won't want to miss what's coming next. The days in my new life began to take on a rhythm of hope and possibility. For the first time in years, I could wake up without fear pressing on my chest. I had survived the unimaginable, acted decisively to escape, and now the path ahead was mine to shape. I spent mornings at the local library, reconnecting with education I had missed during the darkest months. The smell of books, the quiet hum of pages turning, and the gentle encouragement from librarians gave me a sense of normalcy I hadn't felt in ages. Learning became not just a way to catch up, but a symbol of reclaiming my life piece by piece. Afternoons were spent in therapy and counseling sessions, sharing my story, speaking aloud what had happened, and listening to professional guidance became cathartic. Each session reminded me that my past, while painful, did not define my future. I was no longer bound by fear or shame. I had chosen courage and survival, and that choice gave me power. Evenings were my favorite. I would sit in the garden of my new home, feeling the warm sun on my skin and listening to birdsong. The simple joys of life, once taken for granted, now felt extraordinary. I realized that life wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about using the lessons of survival to embrace the present and shape the future. I also began reaching out to others who had faced similar challenges. Through online support groups and community programs, I found strength in connection, understanding that sharing my journey could inspire others to find courage in their own struggles. My experience, as painful as it had been, became a source of hope and empowerment. One day, while walking through the park near my new home, I saw a small child sitting alone, looking lost and frightened. My heart went out to them. I remembered the fear, the isolation, and the desperation I had felt. Approaching gently, I offered words of comfort, realizing that my survival had given me the ability to help others in ways I never imagined. As weeks turned into months, I settled into a life that was safe, supportive, and filled with purpose. My father and stepmother were no longer looming threats. They were figures of the past, powerless to dictate my reality. I had reclaimed my life, and each day was a testament to the strength, courage, and determination that had carried me through the darkest moments. Sitting by the window one quiet evening, I reflected on my journey, from fear and abuse to escape and empowerment, to this new chapter of freedom and purpose. I whispered softly to myself, I chose to survive, chose to fight, chose to live. And now I choose to thrive. The story didn't end with fear. It ended with action, courage, and hope. And I knew that while challenges might still come, I now had the tools, the support, and the resilience to face them. My past had shaped me, but it no longer controlled me. This was not just survival. This was a new beginning. She's not only survived, but she's thriving. And her journey shows that courage and action can change everything. If you were inspired by her story, subscribe now and join our community for more incredible tales of survival, courage, and hope. Don't miss what's coming next.